In this video, you're going to learn how to become a full-time worship pastor by hearing the story of somebody who actually did it. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, your daily dose of practical worship leading tips. If you want to find those tips, head over to Instagram or Facebook at Leading Worship Well, where I'm posting new worship leading tips every single day. But you're here on YouTube, so go ahead, hit subscribe down below, and let's get into it. Because today, we're talking about how to become a full-time worship pastor. And in this video, I'm not just going to give you a bunch of tips like I usually do, but I've actually talked to someone who did it, and it's my worship leading friend, Jimmy Cooper. He's got an amazing YouTube channel called Hey Worship Leader, so I'll link to that down in the description below. Definitely check that out. He posts a ton of great worship leading content over there. But this is a question I get all the time. How do I become a full-time worship leader? And I get it from like young people who are interested in it and want to know, like, do I have to go to college? What's the process look like? I also get it from older worship leaders who have been volunteering at their church for what seems like forever, and they want to make that transition, but they're not sure how to do it. So every situation is different, so I thought it might be beneficial to just hear some stories of how people became full-time worship leaders, and that's what I have for you today. So I'm going to hop into the conversation here that I had with Jimmy, and I'll see you on the other side. Jimmy Cooper, how are you doing today? Good to talk to you.
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. How have you been handling this social distancing, isolation?
Well, as you can see, I'm in my room, so it's just a little different than normal. I'm used
Safe
to
and
being,
sound.
I'm
You're
used
like
to
the
being,
bubble boy,
yeah, exactly.
Jimmy
Yeah,
Bubble Boy Cooper.
I haven't been out of the house in almost 2 weeks. We actually drove somewhere yesterday just to get out, but I didn't get out of the van. So I don't know if that counts.
That's close enough. Hey, so the goal of this conversation is to just hear your story of how you became a worship leader. And in that, I get the question all the time, like, how do I become a full-time worship leader? Because a lot of younger people want to do that as they're working their way. Like, do I need to go to college? Do I need to do this, this, and this? And so I think it's just helpful to hear full-time worship leader stories of how they became a full-time worship leader, because it's not just a normal job where you just sort of apply and you're magically a worship leader now. I mean, applying somewhere is part of the process, but there's a lot more that goes into it than that. So I just want to hear your story of how you became a full-time worship leader.
Yeah, it's not that compelling, but it is a story. It's my story, and I was thinking about this, like how I wish there was steps. I wish there was to be like, hey, 4 steps to become a good full-time worship leader, but it's not the way it worked out for me. I actually um, just started playing acoustic guitar right out of high school, so I got kind of a late start, and I was playing for a Sunday school class. And somebody was like, "Hey, we're starting a new college age worship service. You should play guitar." And I was like, "Yes, a stage where I could play with a band." And it was great. And I was just like the second acoustic player. And the guy who was leading worship and was the main acoustic player, was also a really good drummer. And the drummer that he had hired for this service, this gig, however you want to look at it, he got rid of him like 2 songs into the first rehearsal. He was like, "Hey, this isn't going to cut it." And it was a little awkward. And I was like, "Ugh," I didn't even really know these people.
Yeah.
And he was just like, "Hey, Jimmy, can you finish rehearsal and just sing these songs?" And so I did. I had the lyrics in front of me and I had learned them. And I don't know that until that point, I really knew that I wanted to be a worship leader. I just kind of got thrown into it. I knew I liked music. I mean, to be honest, I learned guitar to pick up chicks, as they say. No, I'm just kidding. But it was definitely not the right motivation. I didn't start playing guitar to songwrite, or I didn't do it to lead God's church in worship through music, like I wish my story was. But I got thrown into it, but then God taught me things over the years. And I've been full-time two different times in my life. So I've had two different full-time jobs. I've been leading worship for about 15 years. And the first full-time um, lasted probably 2 years. And I am 3.5 years into my second one. So out of 15 years, only about 6 of those years have been full-time. And, I just, I really wanted it. I really wanted to be full-time, but sometimes it just didn't happen. It's difficult to happen. So the first time I was in a small church plant, and if you've ever been a part of a church plant, there you wear multiple hats. There's a lot. So I came on as finally I was part-time. I was volunteer part-time, and I finally became full-time. But that included a lot of things that weren't worship. You have to wear many hats. And so I did a lot of different things, which I loved it, because church planting, if you've never done it, can be a real fun, adventurous time, because everything's brand new and it's just an exciting time. And I really love that time, but I also learned a lot, learned what not to do. I was young. It was my first time really digging into what it means to be a worship leader. And the current job that I have now, I was at a larger church in the area, and I'm at Southeastern Seminary in Raleigh, North Carolina. And one of my professors that I had of a church in the area saw me lead worship in the chapel. And he just came to me. It's one of those stories that you would want. He just said, "Hey, we need a worship leader. I saw you lead worship. I want to get to know you, and I want to hire you full time." And I was just like, "Yes, this is how you want it to happen." But it doesn't always happen that way. But it's been a God thing the whole time. I think it's kind of like one of those things where for me anyways, I wasn't actually looking for the full-time job at the time. I was finally settling into being faithful where I was. I was working another job, doing something I didn't really love, but something I could do and feel fulfilled. And then this full-time opportunity came to me. I mean, literally did. And I actually was in a mindset that was different than that full-time job, and I turned it down twice. But yeah, I know, it's like I had a other full-time job. It wasn't worship leading. But I left that meeting with the pastor, and I came home to my wife, who knew I was going to be turning down the job, because we just didn't think we had this own criteria for what we thought God wanted for us right then. And I came home and I was like, maybe we should consider this. This seems not only really good, but something God is stirring in my heart, that this might be what he wants. And so, yeah, that's to answer the quick question. Long story, but how I became a worship leader at the job I'm at now is the pastor actually came to me and asked me. And so it was definitely a God thing.
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing. You kind of talked about the stirring in your heart. So I think the term that a lot of people hear whenever they're talking about pastors or leading in a church is calling. So do you feel like there was a specific time in the story you just shared where you felt like called to be a worship leader, or what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, I don't know that my view of calling is going to be everybody's. I know that there's a call to salvation. And then from there, we have I think that call brings us to ministry using whatever gifts we have. And I think there wasn't anything magical about a specific calling to worship ministry, but it was more about, man, I feel like God put this desire in my heart. My giftings lead that way, although I needed training. I mean, there's a lot of facets of worship leading, and I'm still learning. But I think my call to be a faithful believer, to serve the church well, to get plugged in where I'm at, and my giftings kind of pushed me that way. And that stirring in my heart was like, man, the church needs this. I feel equipped to serve in this way. I have a desire to do it, and so I should do it. And that when all those things came together, and then add the opportunity, then it just like really came together.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think that's good. Yeah, I share a similar understanding of calling. I was talking with someone about that yesterday. Just like I don't feel like it's always this supernatural feeling where you're like, God told me. I mean, I think that happens to some people, but I think for the majority of people, it's like you laid out, like God has laid these opportunities before me time and time again. He's given me the gifts that I need to fulfill that responsibility. And then I think the other piece of it is like other people recognizing it in you, which I heard in your story whenever you said like I guess it's your current pastor now saw
Yeah.
you leading worship and was like, I want you to do
Yeah.
this. So I think that's the other piece of it too. Yep. I think that's good.
For sure. Yeah. That people recognizing that in you, I think is a big thing. Like I said, I'm in a seminary town, and there's not a lot of worship leaders necessarily. It's more pastors, but a lot of my friends and people I've gotten to see, every year, every semester, a chunk of people graduate, and they're all on the market to find the new full-time job. And in a saturated market, it's difficult. And I've had friends who have struggled, who are gifted and talented, have the desire, who just need that opportunity, and being able to walk with people through, man, how can they stay faithful right now in the season that they're in? I believe that God has everybody in where they're at for, it kind of rhymes, a reason and a season. There's, who knows what the reason may be. It may be more development on your end. It may be something you need to learn, like patience. And it may be something that you don't know. I think that a lot of times we look at every situation trying to analyze the reason why, and sometimes we may never know. It may just be something outside of you. We always put ourselves in the middle, but it might just be someone looking and watching how you go through a certain situation. And I think I just got off topic a little bit because you asked.
That's all right.
You asked the
valuable. No, here's another question for you. What's like one piece of advice you'd give to somebody who thinks that they've been called or they've felt this leading to be in full-time ministry? What's one piece of advice you'd give to them?
I would say get plugged in where you are. There's a lot of little things under that heading. I think if you get plugged in where you are, serve your local church well, then God can test you in a few areas. And I think of like checking your motivation. My motivation at the beginning wasn't to shepherd a congregation and lead teams well. It was, there's a stage I want to be on it. And that will never fulfill you. I think if you ever led worship in front of a bigger congregation or a bigger audience, there can be that chase of like, oh, if I could just, man, my friend leads worship and they have 100 people instead of 12. Man, I would love to lead 100 people. And then you go to 500, or at the church I was at before the church I'm at now, they have like 11 locations and it's televised and there's screens. And first time I saw myself on the screen, I was like, I freaked out a little bit, but I went home that night and I talked to my wife and I was like, I haven't really struggled with it. And this is just confirming that, man, I don't need to chase like being in front of a lot of people. That is a horrible motivation because it leaves you empty every time, if that's the motivation. So in that being plugged in where you are, you can check your motivation, but you can also be faithful. That is what happened. So I'll say that little part of my story, that when I moved to this area, before I went to that church, I actually called one of the main worship leaders and I'm like, hey, I'm a worship leader. I'm coming. I want a job. Are you hiring? And they're like, hey, we hire from within. You could come and get plugged in, probably thinking I never would, but that's exactly what I did. I served there for 3 years probably a year and a half before they hired me. And I auditioned for electric guitar at first. I didn't even sing. And then I eventually auditioned for vocals when I made my desire known that I wanted to be a worship leader, which is kind of another thing that you need to do, is make sure people know what you want. That's a little something I wanted to say, and maybe I'll come back to it in just a second. But I just served. I served, volunteer, and I did the best I could, and I loved it because my motivations at this point in my life were I think in the right spot, and that I just wanted to serve the church well. And the leadership recognized it, and when an opportunity came, they offered it to me, and I was glad they did. But I want to go back to that little point about what was I saying? I do this.
Making your intentions known that you want to be a worship leader.
Yes. And the reason I want to mention that is because I've seen this trait in a few people, that when people don't come to them, when they don't recognize it, they kind of mope around and they get this kind of defeated mentality, like, man, nobody recognizes my gifting and nobody's coming to me and things aren't being handed to me and treating me like I'm precious. Um, that is not a good quality in a worship leader. And I don't think God honors that very much. And so I would think being plugged in where you are helps kind of filter some of these things out. And, you need to make your desires known because people don't just know. And then if you haven't made your desires known and no one's come to you, don't mope around about it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think you've kind of talked about like, I hear like misunderstanding of what it means to be a worship leader. Like we need to prepare ourselves to understand what it actually means to be a worship leader before we step into that role. At least that's the healthy way to do it. So just thinking about that, like now that you are a full-time worship leader, what's one thing that you think most people would find surprising about it that the average person wouldn't think about being a worship leader? Like maybe a misconception or like something you realized is completely different than you thought now that you're a full-time worship leader.
For sure. I get, I try to pour into people all the time, and people who show gifting and worship leading at a young age, I want to, give them the knowledge that I have. And a lot of times I've heard things like, man, I want your job. You get to sit around and play guitar and write songs for your job. That's amazing. And I was like, yes, I do get to do that sometimes. And it is an amazing job. I won't complain, but the surprising aspect is there's a lot more to it, or I think there at least should be a lot more to it than just playing guitar, and singing songs. For me, one of the most needed things in the local church right now is for musicians to transition into shepherds of the church. A lot of times the music can just be in preparation for the sermon, and in some aspects it is, but it's like a separate thing. And whether you're a pastor at your church or not, I think it's important to view your job that way, to think about how I'm shepherding through the songs I choose and the way I do it. You could avoid a lot of problems in music if you think about it that way. So I think that's the more surprising part. The thing I'm learning the most over the years is, most of the drama I've ever seen in churches all my life is centered around music somehow, the preference of it. And if you can transition from thinking like a musician and transition into thinking more like how can I shepherd these people? It builds trust with your people. People understand that you're not just someone on stage looking for a stage. You're not just someone who's trying to promote an album or have your voice be heard, but you care for them first. And then a lot of those other things work out. And I think a lot of worship leaders don't realize that going into it at the beginning. I sure didn't. And it's something I had to learn.
Yeah. I always tell people that being a worship leader is like 10% music and 90% people. And most people think it's like 95% music and 5% people. But got to get the ratio right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story, Jimmy. If you don't know, Jimmy runs Hey Worship Leader, which is a YouTube channel and a website. So Jimmy, what do you want to tell us about Hey Worship Leader? Some exciting stuff coming up?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. I try to put out some helpful content. You could go subscribe to that if you'd like. But the most important thing for me is that I do have a heart for pouring into worship leaders. And so you could go to heyworshipleader.com and check out what I offer. But just quickly, I do worship workshops around once a month where we just go over practical tips and tricks, I guess, for how to lead worship leading worship well.
Oh,
how to lead worship well.
That's copyrighted. You can't.
I know. I shouldn't have said that. Whether it's just practical, how to play bass well or stage presence. And then my other passion is to come alongside worship leaders. And so I provide mentor coaching where I'll come alongside a worship leader in a church for a season and work with them through the various aspects of worship ministry, where I've noticed that you can get a lot of training online, but I wanted to offer the mentorship part of it, where I'm specifically supporting them and praying for them and keeping them motivated and accountable through however long the season that is. So I'm looking forward to that. That I'm just getting that up and running. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today, Jimmy. It was good to talk to you and hear your story. I hadn't heard Jimmy's story yet, so it was all new to me. It was good to get to know you a little bit better.
And it was good talking to you too, man.
Yeah, all right. I'll see you in a little bit, I guess. We'll talk soon.
All right.
See ya. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jimmy Cooper. I think it's just helpful to hear people's stories of how they became a worship leader. And I'm sure his stories could have similarities with other people's, but there's probably some differences in there too, which is why I might do more of these in the future. So if you want more videos like this where I'm just having a conversation with some worship leading friends, and it could be on the topic of how they became a full-time worship leader, could be on a different topic. If you want more of that, make sure to hit the like button so I know that you liked this video. Leave a comment in the description below and let me know if you are a full-time worship leader. Let me know a little bit of your story. Let's encourage each other in the comments and let people see that this is a journey. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I took away from this conversation was that this takes time. Like, just be faithful in serving where you're currently at and allow God to open the doors. So that being said, thanks so much for joining me today. Once again, my name's Spencer Cormany from leadingworshipwell.com, and until I see you in the next one, keep leading worship well.